Hello everybody, this is Sangeet from Bit of Learning. Today I will show how to generate dynamic meta tags on the server for a React app. I'll be using the Create React App template, and of course it doesn't support server-side rendering, but there is a way of doing this such that each route has a custom HTML page, and what then happens is that HTML file will have the title and description, or OG title, OG description specific to that route. So the way I've done this is in my apps is that I run Express on the server, and Express then reads the HTML file and it then substitutes the appropriate content for a given route into these placeholders. And as you go to another route, then it'll do the same thing for those routes also. And what then happens is that for SEO purposes, each route will have specific title and description, and this is simply not possible if you just use say React Helmet, because it has to be rendered on the server, and SEOs typically do not read, Google will not really render your JavaScript app, so it's useless if you're going to just be using React Helmet. So there are a couple of other ways of doing this, which is injecting data from the server into the page. And you can also do this by using React Snapshot or React Snap. These essentially do the same thing, but the route that I've taken is using the way of simply generating this dynamic meta tags on the server. And as a bonus, the other thing that I'll speak about is setting up a CI/CD chain. So I'll deploy this to Azure, and I will show you how you can set up continuous integration and continuous deployment. So I'll set up a pipeline, and then I'll set up a release. So it should be a lot of fun seeing how this is done. I struggled with this quite a bit when I had to add this functionality to one of my existing production apps, because there really wasn't much literature on how to actually implement this. So I hope what I show over here is useful to other folks. So the first thing that we have to do is create a folder in our app itself. And let me start by showing you this simple Create React App application. This is running on port 3000. So let us open this up. So this is the app that I have right now. So you have the home route, then you have the Starlink, rockets, launches, history, about. Now you'll notice that if I look at the page source, then it has this default title, and it has this meta description, and this doesn't change from route to route, right? When you go to the home, and then again if you say view page source, then again you see the same description and you see the same title. So what we have to do is read this HTML file and then substitute, have placeholders. So for that, we need to create a server.js file. So I'm going to create a folder in the root. So now we'll require a few modules. The first will be Express. Next will be path. And the last module we need is FS. We'll be listening on port that's supplied by our process.env, but if that is null, then we'll listen on port 5000. We then start our Express app, and here we define a few routes. So these are the routes for which we will be substituting our placeholders. The first is the home route. This takes callback as its second argument. Once we have a file path, we'll then pass that as the first argument to fs read file. Encoding is UTF-8, and if we run into an error, we will simply console log that out. If error, then we will return console. If everything is good, then we'll start substituting the placeholders. So the first thing we're going to look for is going to be meta OG title, and we'll look for this globally, and we will replace this with home. Okay, we'll chain this because we have a few other replacements. Next, we will look for meta OG description. So this is for our social media platforms, again globally, and we'll call this home. We'll also have for SEO purposes, we need to have just the meta title and meta description, and so these two are purely for SEO purposes for our crawlers. And finally, once you're done with this, with the replacement, that is, we will go ahead and send it. Let's format that. There we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this same piece of code and paste it here for some of our other routes. So if you notice in our app right here, one is the home route, but we also have Starlink, rockets, launches, history, and about. So we'll set up substitutions for each of these. So if you go back to our application, then we have Starlink. So let's go ahead and put that here. And now we'll change this to Starlink. Actually, let's call this Starlink description. And I will do the same here. Call this description. This is our title. To change this to Starlink and Starlink description. All right, so we've taken care of this route. The next route that we have is rockets. So So rather than making your CME type for each of these routes, I've gone ahead and quickly pasted the other routes. So you have about, you have history, which essentially does the same thing, launches, and rockets, which we'd already typed out. So the next thing that we have to do is we have to let Express know that when the HTML is served, then it should allow serving the other static resources. So essentially when you build, you'll get an HTML file, and that HTML file will have your JSS, will have your CSS, etc., and that has to be served. So the way to do that is to use a middleware called Express Static. So we'll do exactly that, and then we'll say express dot static, and that then takes the path, and we say resolve dir name. So essentially we're saying everything in the build folder, please allow those static resources to be served. We need one more piece of code for the routes which are not matched. So essentially, and I'll paste that piece of code. So this is a catch-all for all the routes which are not matched. And the idea over here being that we want to simply return the index.html file as is for all the unmatched routes. So our client router can handle errors. So in other words, if I go back to my app itself, you'll notice that if I have about to, say, then I want the Express app to simply serve the index.html file unmolested, as is, and let the client side router, which in this case is React router, to take care of handling errors and such. And so that's what this piece of code over here does for you. And lastly, we have to get our Express app to listen on port either 5000 or the one which is supplied by a process.env. We need one more file in the server.js subdirectory, and we'll call that file copy server.js. And the job of this, the responsibility of this file is to copy the server.js, this file we are going to copy to the build folder, and we'll run this via node, and we'll make this part of our build process, because each time we create a build, we will need server, this file, to be present in the build folder. So the next thing I have to do is create a npm script for copying the server.js file to the build folder. And I'll create a new npm script, call that dev build :dev, and here we will say npm run server.js script. So here we are doing two things. We are building as before, but we are also copying the server.js file to the build folder. Let's run this. So as you can see, I now have the server.js file in my build folder. Next, what you have to do is go into our public folder, and over here in the index.html, we need to put our placeholders. So what I'm going to do is just put our placeholders right here. So I have my OG title, description, OG description, and I also have my title. And if we go to our server.js file, then you'll see we had OG title, OG description, title and description, and we have exactly that over here itself. So the placeholders are meta title, meta OG title, meta description, meta OG description, right? The next thing we will do is go back over here, and I'm already here in my build folder because we had built this, but there's one thing I'm going to do, which is I'm going to npm install I've already done that, but you'll want to do this is npm install pm2, and you'll want to do this globally. And the reason you want to do this is because, if you remember, at the beginning of this video, I had said that not only will I run this locally, but I'll also deploy this to Azure. Now that you've installed PM2, you'll want to cd into the build folder, and over here we will launch this Node Express application using PM2. So we'll say PM2 start server JS. We'll give it a flag of no daemon, and we can optionally give it a name. And now we are running on port 5000. So let's go there to port 5000. So now let's see if we've been able to substitute those meta tags. So let's say view page source. Let's scroll. There you have it. You have the description, and we are on the route rockets, and we have rocket description, and OG description is rockets description. If we go to any other route like about, then again if we say view page source, then again we should see this getting updated. And one other thing, that if we go to a route that is an invalid route, then we still, the index.html still gets served, right? So now we are letting our React router on the client side handle this invalid route. And if you want to stop this process, the PM2 process, then all you have to do is say PM2 stop and say space X. So essentially, if you remember, to starting the process, we did PM2 start and we gave it the optional name, right? And to stop it, all you have to do is say PM2 stop and use that name. All right, so one other thing you'll notice is that when we are on port 5000, then the title over here is not getting updated, right, for each of those routes. So, and that's because if you go back to our index.html, then we haven't really put the placeholder over here. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll do meta title, right? We save this and we'll need to build again. So let's go ahead and stop this process and let's build again. So now I have a fresh build. Let's cd back into the build folder and let's start server JS, giving it a no daemon flag and name of space X. All right, let's go back and refresh. And yes, we see rockets because that's the route we are on. But if we come to Starlink, then it stays as rockets. So what's happening over here? But if we refresh, then yes, we do see Starlink. So what's happening over here is that The tabs over here are being rendered when we change routes, right? This is being rendered by the React router. And even though the page source itself, let's go to launches page source. And over here, if we go to the page source, you'll notice that the title should have been updated, right? And it has been updated. So from the perspective of SEO purposes, the title has been updated, but yet we see the old link. So the way to solve this so that visually this is updated is to install or use React Helmet. And so I'm going to go ahead and install React Helmet. I'll also install the types for React Helmet. Since this is a TypeScript app, I use the TypeScript template to create this app. Let's go to the React Helmet documentation. And we'll just copy this and paste this on each of our pages. So let's go to our source, and over here, let's go to components, pages, and I have my main page. So let's start with about, and over here, I'm going to paste this. And let's go ahead and do this for each of our other pages. So I've done this for about. I'm going to do the same thing for history. So I went ahead and added this helmet attribute element to each of the pages. So I have one in home, I have one in rockets, launches, history, about, and let's go ahead and build this again. Now that's built, we will run this. And let's go back and take a look at, so if I refresh, I see launches, but when I go to rockets, then I see this title getting updated. History, about. So essentially, we do have to use React Helmet when you're navigating using the React router, so that the tab over here, the title over here, gets updated. But for SEO purposes, for social media platform, we do need to have the page source being updated, and that we are doing using the server.js file. So there are two aspects to this. So as you can see, we are almost all done, but there is one other detail which is still missing, and that detail is for when we deploy to Azure. So what happens is that when I'm running PM2 from the folder over here, from the build folder, then Express is already available to me because I'm running in the context of these node modules right here. So Express is available to me. But when I deploy this to Azure or a Linux box, then Express will not be available to me. So what I have to really do is create, as part of my build, create a file similar to what we have in server.js, which will copy the packages for installing, which will copy the package.json to the build folder so that we can then install Express. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So let's go ahead and first create a new folder, and we'll call that Express Node Modules. And in that Express Node Modules, I will create two files. One will be a package.json, and the other will be copy package.json. And this package.json will have the Express node modules which have to be installed. And then in the copy.json package.json, I will simply pick up whatever this package.json is and dump it into the build folder. So that'll look like so. So I'm saying everything in Express modules package.json, copy it to the build folder, and then just like we did for server.js, we need to write a script in our package.json file. So let me just copy this from here. And let's call this copy package JSON, and this will be node folders Express node modules, and we are calling copy package JSON, copy package. And then over here, just like we did for copy server.js, we need to run the script copy package JSON. All right, let's run this. So we have a fresh build, and if you go to the build folder, you'll notice that we now have package.json over here. And so the idea over here is this, that when we deploy to Azure, then as part of our pipeline, what we will do is that we will say cd into the build folder, and then we're going to do an npm install. And what that'll do is that it will put the node modules for Express right here in the build folder itself, so that when we run PM2, right, when we run PM2 as so on the server on Azure, then it'll be able to find the Express.js modules. And if you remember, server.js, which resides over here, requires Express. So we are doing this purely when we deploy to Azure. Okay, so we are just about done over here. I can't see anything else that we need to do. So locally our app is running and we are able to substitute meta tags. But now the next step is to set this up in Azure. So we will create a Git repository in Azure and then write the pipeline for building the application and then for deploying. So that's coming up next. So I'm here in Azure DevOps. Let's create a new project. So if we go to the repos section, then we will use this to push our existing application. So let's go back to VS Code. The first thing we have to do is init. Next we'll do is git add and then git commit. And git branch main. Next, let's go ahead and add our remote repository, and let's go back and copy git push original. So if we come back to Azure DevOps, you'll see that we have our initial commit over here. Okay, so I've already created the YAML file which will handle our build, and I'll walk you through what I'm doing over here. So the trigger is main, so any changes to the main folder should trigger a build. Next, I've set up environment variables. One is UI source, so it'll fetch the information from the default directory /SpaceX client app, which is this, and then it'll push the build to the UI source, and within that it'll create the build folder. Next, I have some tasks that I've set up. One is node tool. Since we are using React scripts version 5, I need to have at least node version 14.5.0. So that's what these lines over here do. Next, I'm going to do, and it's commented out over here, what I'm planning to do is that I cd, push d means cd into the source, npm install, then run build dev. This is already a task we have in packaged package.json right here. And then the next thing that we have to do is popd, which is let's exit this directory. Next, what we do is we again push d, in other words, cd into the UI build folder, this recently created build folder over here. Let's cd into that, and we're going to do npm install. And when we do npm install over here, if you remember, I spoke about this, that we will then install the Express node module. So it'll look for this package.json and it'll install the node modules. Once it's done that, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to archive this and then publish this artifact, this archive, to our web app. So let's go ahead and push this newly created Azure pipeline YAML file. If you go back to our project on Azure Devops, then we can see that this YAML file now exists in our repository. So now we're going to create a new pipeline. So I did that by going to pipeline, and then you say pipelines over here, and you say create pipeline. And we are saying that we want Azure repo git. And then we'll point to SpaceX. And then, since we have everything we need, we'll go ahead and let's run this. And this will create the new pipeline. It's running the pipeline right now. So as you can see, the pipeline ran successfully. And if you look at the artifact, and if you open this file, then you'll see that it has everything we need to deploy this application to our web app on Azure. So we have the node modules, and this will have Express, and we also have our build right here, all our other static assets, and we also have our server.js file right here. So we are in good shape. This ran well, and we have everything we need. The next thing to do is create the web app in Azure, and then we will deploy, we'll set up a release pipeline to deploy this these assets to Azure web app. So let's do that next. So I'm here in Azure. I'm going to create a resource. This is going to be a web app. So I'm going to say create, and I'm going to give it a new resource group. So, or actually I can just select an existing resource group, and then I will give it a name. I'll just call it SpaceX 1, 2, 3, and we are going to use Node, and it's going to be on a Linux box, and let's leave this as Central US for now, and let's go ahead and create this web app. So Azure has provisioned our new web application. Let's go ahead and see if we can access that. It took a while for this to spin up for the first time, but as you can see, we do have our web app, which is now running. So now all that's left for us to do is to create our release pipeline so that what we've built can be deployed to this web app. So now let's create a new release pipeline. Let's pick up the Azure App Service deployment template. And we're going to say we have to add an artifact. So essentially we have to show this release pipeline where the build, which build to pick up. Next, let's configure the jobs. We'll pick up our subscription over here. Next, we'll say that this is going to be a Linux web app on Linux. We then have to pick up our app service name. This is where the code is going to be deployed. This shows us SpaceX123. Our startup command will be as follows. I'm just going to paste. So this says we are going to run PM2 and we will run server.js, the Express app, from this location right here. Because if you recall, we are deploying our code in the home site www root subdirectory, which will then have the server.js over there. And this is the no daemon flag. Once we've done that, we're going to hit save. And then let's create the release itself. The release is being created. This is our first release. As you can see, this has deployed successfully to our app service. Now let's go to our app service and see if we can load our application. And as you can see, I'm on SpaceX123 Azure websites.net, and our application is loading successfully. And if we go and say view page source, then we should be seeing the updated meta tags. I hope you found this video tutorial useful. Please don't forget to like, and please do subscribe, and I look forward to hearing from you in the comment section. Thank you. Bye.